Nathan Caldwell had never lost a bet in his life, and he wasn't planning to start now. It was the kind of October evening that made Toronto feel like the center of the universe. The CN Tower glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom. 200 of the city's wealthiest gathered for the Caldwell Foundation's annual gala. Nathan moved through the crowd the way he always did, with the quiet certainty of a man who owned the room, because more often than not, he actually did. His best friend since university, Spencer Holt, caught up with him near the bar, already 2 whiskeys deep and wearing that particular grin that had preceded every bad idea they'd ever had together. "I've been watching you work this room for 20 minutes, Spencer said, handing Nathan a glass. "You've shaken exactly 14 hands and smiled exactly 0 times. You know what your problem is? I'm sure you're going to tell me. You're bored. You've conquered everything on your list." Spencer nodded toward the crowd. "Business, money, real estate. You've even done the charity gala circuit so long it's just tax strategy now." Nathan said nothing because Spencer wasn't wrong. "So here's what I'm thinking." Spencer lowered his voice, conspiratorial. "There's a woman, works at the legal aid clinic on Dundas West, single mother. No connections, no family money, no interest in any of this." He gestured at the room. "I bet you $100,000 you can't get her to agree to 6 months of dating. Not flash your credit card at her, not charm her with the penthouse. Actually make her choose you." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "That's not a bet. That's a social experiment, which is exactly why you'll lose." Spencer smiled. "Her name is June Whitfield. She's been fighting the city over a rezoning decision that's going to displace about 300 low-income tenants from a building your development firm happens to co-own." The silence that followed was brief but heavy. "Now it's interesting," Spencer said. Nathan set down his glass. "Fine." He didn't ask why Spencer had chosen this woman specifically. He should have. Nathan's assistant found everything that was findable about June Whitfield within 24 hours. 31 years old. Born in Hamilton. Law degree from Osgood, articling completed, never joined a firm. Instead, she'd gone directly to a legal aid clinic in one of the city's most underfunded neighborhoods, where she'd been for 4 years making a salary that Nathan spent on dinner for clients without noticing. She had a daughter, 7 years old, named Bea, and no partner listed anywhere. She drove a 2011 Civic with 1 dented door. She had a blog she'd updated twice in the last 3 years, both posts about tenant rights. When Nathan actually met her, none of the file prepared him. It was at a City Hall committee meeting about the Dundas Corridor rezoning, a meeting Nathan had no business attending, but attended anyway, in a suit that cost more than the monthly rent of most people in the room. He sat in the back. June Whitfield stood at the podium in a charcoal blazer that had been pressed carefully but was fraying at one cuff, and she systematically dismantled the city's legal argument in 11 minutes without once raising her voice. Afterward, in the hallway, he approached her. "Ms. Whitfield." He extended a hand. "Nathan Caldwell." She looked at his hand, then at him. She shook it, brief, firm. "I know who you are," she said. "Your firm holds a 30% stake in the Dundas West property. That's right. Then I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Caldwell. If you're here to offer a settlement that makes this go away quietly, the answer is no. My clients have been in that building for a combined total of over 400 years. It's not a portfolio adjustment. It's their home." She held his gaze. Not hostile exactly, but completely unimpressed. Nathan had been in rooms with prime ministers and CEOs who gave him more deference than this woman in a fraying blazer was giving him in a fluorescent-lit City Hall corridor. He found himself saying something he hadn't planned. "What if I wanted to hear more about the case?" She studied him. "Why? Because you made a more compelling argument in 11 minutes than my lawyers have made about anything in months. I'm curious about the person who did that." A pause. She tilted her head slightly, as if recalibrating. "Coffee," she said. "Not dinner. Not a firm lunch. Coffee. I have 40 minutes Thursday morning before I'm back in court." "Thursday morning," he agreed. She walked away without looking back. Nathan stood in the hallway for a moment longer than he needed to. The coffee was at a place on Dundas that didn't have Wi-Fi and served their drinks in mismatched mugs. Nathan arrived first and sat with his espresso feeling conspicuously overdressed. June arrived 4 minutes late, ordered a medium dark roast, sat down, and looked at him the same way she'd looked at the committee, like she was identifying exactly where the argument was weak. "So," she said, "what do you actually want?" He told her he was reconsidering the development firm's position on the rezoning, that he thought there might be a more creative solution than full displacement. She asked pointed questions and he gave her honest answers, which surprised him slightly. He was used to giving strategic answers. There was something about her directness that made strategy feel exhausting. Before he knew it, 40 minutes had become 90 and June was checking her phone with a look of genuine surprise. "I have to go." She stood, and then, with the air of someone making a professional assessment, "This was more useful than I expected." "Useful," he repeated. "Is that disappointing?" "No," he said, and meant it. "Same time next week?" She considered it for exactly 3 seconds. "Sure." Over the weeks that followed, Nathan told himself it was still the bet. He told himself he was conducting research, building trust, playing a long game the way he played every game. He took her to the kind of places she suggested. A ramen spot near her clinic, a Saturday farmer's market in the annex, a free outdoor concert at Harborfront that he'd never have thought to attend, and he noticed, without meaning to notice, the precise way she laughed at something genuinely funny versus politely funny. He noticed she always cut her sandwiches in half before eating them. He noticed she had a habit of pausing before answering anything important, as though she owed the question her full attention. He met Bea once, briefly, at the end of a Saturday when June's babysitter canceled. Bea was 7 and solemn and shook his hand very seriously, and then went back to her coloring book. June watched this interaction with the careful attention of a woman who had learned to read rooms quickly out of necessity. "She doesn't warm up fast," June said. "Neither do I," Nathan said. June smiled at that, a real one, not the professional version. He was in trouble, and he knew it, and he kept going anyway. 3 months in, Spencer found him at the office late on a Wednesday. "You're actually into her," Spencer said, with the tone of someone who had expected this to be funny and was no longer sure. "It's the bet," Nathan said, without conviction. Spencer sat down. "Right. Because you've been to a farmer's market 3 times in October and November, which I know because you mentioned it, which I know because you never mention women." Nathan didn't answer. "For what it's worth," Spencer said, "she sounds like someone worth losing to." That night Nathan sat in his penthouse and stared at the city and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the view looked like a cage. The truth came out on a Tuesday in December, which Nathan would always remember as the coldest night of that particular winter. He'd had a frustrating day. 2 deals stalled, a contractor dispute, the kind of Tuesday that used to roll off him completely. He went to pick up June for what had become their standing Wednesday dinner, arrived a day early by mistake, and found her at her kitchen table with Bea already in bed, and files spread across every surface. She looked up when he knocked. Something in her face when she opened the door was different, not the professional reserve, not even the warmer version he'd earned over months. It was tiredness of a specific kind, the kind that lives deeper than sleep. "You're a day early," she said. "I know, I'm sorry. Bad day." He paused. "You okay?" A long moment, and then she said, "Come in." She made tea. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, among the files, and she looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, something calculating but also exhausted, as though she'd been carrying something too long and was finally setting it down. "There's something I should have told you before now," she said. He waited. "The Dundas West building." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "The reason I took that case, I didn't pick it out of a stack. I grew up in that building. My mother and I lived on the 4th floor for 11 years, after my father left." Nathan held still. "My mother got sick when I was 16. She lost her job. We fell behind on rent." June's voice was steady, but only in the way of something that had been steadied with great effort. "The building was sold in 2009. The new ownership group moved fast, fees, violations, pressure. Within 8 months my mother and I were out. She never recovered financially. She died 3 years later." A pause. "She was 51. He said her name. I'm not finished. Not unkind, just precise. "The ownership group that bought that building in 2009, I traced it, eventually, while I was in law school. It took me a long time, because they'd layered the corporate structure carefully. But I got there." She looked at him directly. Caldwell Property Holdings was one of the founding partners. The room was very quiet. Nathan felt something shift. Not just guilt, though there was that, flooding in fast. It was the particular disorientation of realizing you are standing on ground you thought was solid and finding it isn't. "I didn't know," he said. That building was one of 40 acquisitions that year. I didn't review the individual tenant impact reports. I had people for that. He heard how it sounded as he said it. That's not an excuse. No, June agreed. It isn't. You knew who I was at City Hall. Yes, did you agree to coffee because I wanted to look you in the eye, she said. I wanted to understand how someone makes those decisions, whether they know, whether they care. A pause. And then I kept agreeing to coffee because it turned out to be more complicated than I'd planned. He sat with that. Did you ever intend to? He stopped. He wasn't sure what he'd been about to ask. Hurt you? Her voice was level. I thought about it. I thought about going public, about making sure the connection between you and that building was part of the public record of this case. I still might. She looked at him steadily. But I didn't come into this dishonestly, Nathan. I came in angry. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. My mother's name was Carol, June said, and her voice changed slightly on the name, going softer at the edges. She liked crossword puzzles and terrible reality television, and she made the best butter tarts in Hamilton, Ontario. She never owned anything in her life because people like the 2009 version of you kept making it impossible. I need you to know her name. Nathan didn't have words for a long time. Carol, he finally said. I'll remember. He left that night without dinner. He drove home and sat in his car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before going upstairs. He called Spencer. You knew, Nathan said, silence on the other end. Then, I knew she worked the Dundas case. I didn't know about her mother. Did you make that bet to teach me something? Another pause. I made that bet because you'd turned into someone who needed to be inconvenienced, Spencer said. The rest of it, that's not what I intended. Nathan hung up. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk and pulled up everything. The 2009 acquisition records, the tenant displacement reports he'd never read, the internal memos from the management company they'd hired. It was all there. 312 tenants displaced over 14 months. The reports used phrases like natural attrition and portfolio optimization. Not one name, not Carol Whitfield, not a 51-year-old woman who liked crossword puzzles and wouldn't live to see 52. He read it all. It took until 4 a.m. He didn't contact June for 10 days. She didn't reach out either. He thought about her constantly, not in the abstract way he'd been thinking about her as a subject of a bet, but specifically. Her hands around the mug, the way she'd said her mother's name, the steadiness in her voice that cost her something to maintain. On the 11th day, he drove to the legal aid clinic on Dundas. It was snowing lightly, the kind of early December snow that makes Toronto look briefly forgivable. He asked the receptionist if Ms. Whitfield was available. He waited 20 minutes. When June came out, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't categorize, wary, and something else. I've been doing things, he said. I wanted you to know. She gestured toward a small meeting room. They sat across a table meant for client consultations. He told her what he'd done. He'd started with the Dundas case, not settling it away, but actually restructuring the development plan. Affordable units retained, tenant protections written into the new agreement. It would cost his firm significantly more. He'd already signed off on it. He told her he'd been going through the 2009 acquisitions displaced tenant list, which had taken 3 different lawyers and a private investigator to reconstruct, because the records had been minimal, which itself was damning, and reaching out to families, not with hush money, with actual reparation, housing assistance funds, financial restitution, referrals to legal aid. There were 62 families identified so far. He wasn't finished. June listened to all of this without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a long moment. Why, she finally said. Not skeptically, but like she genuinely needed the answer. Because I read the reports, he said. All of them, the ones I should have read in 2009. And I understood for the first time that I had been making decisions that I thought were abstract. Numbers, percentages, portfolio terms, but weren't abstract at all to the people they were about. He paused. Your mother deserved better than to be a line item in a displacement report. So did 311 other people. I can't fix that, but I can be accountable for it. I can do something real. June looked at the table. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, but her expression was composed. I need to tell you something else, she said. He waited. When I first looked into who bought that building, I was furious. I built a whole case in my head. What I would do if I ever met the people responsible. And when Spencer Holt suggested you'd want to meet me, I thought it was fate handing me something." Nathan looked up sharply. "Spencer introduced us. He came to one of our tenant meetings. Said he thought you might be someone worth talking to about a settlement." A pause. "He didn't tell me about the bet. I figured that out later. A mutual contact mentioned it." Her voice was careful. "I could have used it. I chose not to." Nathan sat back. Spencer had arranged this from both sides. He understood it now in full. The question wasn't whether he was angry about it. The question was whether any of it had been false. "Was any of it? Were you pretending?" he asked. "No." She said it without hesitation. "I was angry, and then I was confused, and then—" She stopped. "I stopped being strategic about it around month 2. When you came to the concert and you actually listened to the opening act because I told you they were interesting, you took notes on your phone. A hint of something almost like fondness. You thought I didn't see. He hadn't known she'd seen." "I don't know what we're doing," June said. "I know I'm not finished being angry. I know my mother's still gone. I know the Dundas case isn't over, and I need to keep being your opponent on that, professionally, until it resolves correctly." She looked at him steadily. "But I'm also not walking away from whatever this has been. Neither am I." The December snow was still falling outside the window of the meeting room. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. A door opened and closed. "There's something else," June said, and her voice changed slightly in a way that made him go still. "Bay," she said. "She doesn't have a father in her life. She doesn't ask about it much, but she will soon. And she shook your hand that Saturday very seriously, and she told me afterward that you seemed real." A pause. "B doesn't say that about people." He didn't speak because he didn't trust his voice. "I'm not asking you for anything," June said quickly. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what it means when I say I'm not walking away. It means all of it. It's not just me." "I know," Nathan said. "I understood that already." She nodded slowly. Outside, the snow kept falling. The Dundas West rezoning was resolved in February, 4 months later, in a way that preserved housing for every original long-term tenant who wished to remain. The agreement was covered in 3 local papers and 1 national outlet. June Whitfield was quoted. Nathan Caldwell's firm was mentioned as having reversed its position significantly. The phrasing was neutral, journalistic. Nobody wrote the fuller story, which was messier and more human than any headline could hold. Spencer met Nathan for dinner the week after. He was quieter than usual. "I owe you an apology," Spencer said. "For making the bet, or for engineering the introduction? Both. And for not telling June about the bet myself." He turned his glass in his hands. I thought if I got you into a room with someone who was actually going to push back, something would shift in you. I'd been watching you for 2 years, becoming someone I didn't recognize. And now?" Spencer looked at him. "Now I think I was right about the problem and mostly wrong about my right to solve it." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "She figured it out herself. I know. She chose not to use it. I know that too." Spencer set down his glass. "You got lucky, Nathan. She's a better person than the situation deserved." He didn't argue with that. He didn't think he'd ever argue with it. On the first warm Saturday in April, Nathan drove to the farmer's market in the annex. His 4th time, though the first where he arrived knowing it was something he genuinely wanted to do rather than part of any strategy. June met him there with Bea, who was wearing a jacket with a bee embroidered on the pocket, and who, after some deliberation, agreed to let Nathan carry the canvas bags. This was not a small concession. He treated it accordingly. Later, at a picnic table with bad coffee and good croissants, Bea informed Nathan very seriously that she was learning French at school, and that croissant was a French word and that France was a country. "I knew one of those things," Nathan told her gravely. Bea considered this. "Which one?" "The country part." Bea nodded, apparently satisfied with this division of knowledge between them. June watched from the other side of the table with her coffee, and she had an expression Nathan had come to recognize over the last few months. Unguarded, briefly, in a way she probably didn't know she allowed. He wasn't going to tell her about it. He was going to be someone who deserved it. That felt like the longer and more honest project, and for the first time in his life, he was in no hurry to reach the end. That spring, when June finally told him she loved him, not dramatically, just before she fell asleep one evening on his couch, while Bea was at his guest room with a chapter book. He said it back, without any of the careful thinking he'd applied to every important thing for as long as he could remember. It came out just like that. Easy. True. Some things you win by stopping trying to win them. Nathan Caldwell, who had never understood that in 42 years of calculating odds, finally did.